The salvage ship Void Dancer drifted through the asteroid field like a metal predator hunting for scraps. Captain Zektar adjusted his four eyes to focus on the scanner readings, his chitinous fingers clicking against the control panel. The Krillian had been running salvage operations for over 20 cycles, but nothing had prepared him for what his sensors were detecting. "Captain," his engineer Voss called from the rear of the bridge, her tentacles wrapped around multiple data streams. "The readings are off the charts. Whatever's in that derelict ship, it's giving off energy signatures I've never seen before." Zektar's mandibles clicked with interest. The human vessel had been floating dead in space for what appeared to be centuries, maybe longer. The metal hull was scarred and blackened, showing signs of battles that must have taken place before most civilizations in this sector had even developed spaceflight. Yet somehow, deep within its core, something was still active. "Any signs of life?" Zektar asked, though he already knew the answer. Nothing could survive that long in the cold vacuum of space. The humans were a young race, barely having achieved faster-than-light travel a few hundred years ago before mysteriously vanishing from known space. Most galactic historians considered them extinct, just another species that had burned too bright and faded too quickly. "Negative on life signs, Captain. But there's definitely something generating power in there. The readings are consistent with some kind of stasis technology, but far more advanced than anything we've encountered." Zektar made his decision. "Prep the boarding pod. We're going in." The Void Dancer's crew had seen their share of derelict vessels over the years. Most were empty hulks, stripped clean by previous salvagers or reduced to scrap by whatever catastrophe had befallen them. But human ships were different. They built their vessels with a strange combination of practicality and artistry that other species found both fascinating and puzzling. As the boarding pod latched onto the human vessel's airlock, Zektar couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to disturb something that should have remained buried in the dark between the stars. The airlock cycled with surprising efficiency for something so old, and soon the three-member boarding team found themselves walking through corridors that should have been frozen and lifeless. Instead, emergency lighting cast an eerie red glow throughout the ship, and the atmosphere was surprisingly warm and breathable. Voss ran her scanner over the walls, her expression growing more confused by the moment. "Captain, this ship is actively maintaining life support. The power core is running at about 15% capacity, but that's more than enough to keep basic systems operational for, well, indefinitely at this rate." Their third team member, a massive Gorvok named Thane, hefted his plasma rifle and grunted. Humans always were strange. Building ships that could run themselves into the grave. The corridors were wider than those found in most modern vessels, with what appeared to be decorative elements worked into the functional design. Strange symbols were etched into the metal walls, and occasionally they passed viewports that looked out into the star-filled void. Everything about the ship spoke of a culture that valued both form and function, even in their military vessels. They made their way deeper into the ship, following Voss's scanner readings toward the source of the energy signatures. The readings grew stronger as they approached what appeared to be the ship's central core, located deep within its heavily armored belly. "Whatever's down here," Voss muttered, "it's been running continuously for a very long time. The power fluctuations suggest some kind of automated cycle, like a heartbeat." The comparison made Zektar uncomfortable, though he couldn't say why. They passed through several blast doors, each one opening automatically as they approached. The ship's computer system was clearly still functional, and it seemed to be welcoming them deeper into its mysteries. Finally, they reached a massive circular chamber that took up nearly a quarter of the ship's interior volume. The walls were lined with what appeared to be sophisticated monitoring equipment, all of it still active and displaying readouts in the flowing script that humans had used for their written language. In the center of the chamber sat a single cylindrical pod, roughly the size and shape needed to hold a human form. The pod was constructed from some kind of crystal and metal composite that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. Cables and tubes connected it to the surrounding equipment, and the soft hum of machinery filled the air. Through the transparent front panel, they could see a figure inside. "By the void," Thane whispered, his massive frame suddenly seeming small in the presence of whatever they had discovered. "Is that?" "A human," Zektar confirmed, his voice barely above a whisper. "A real, living human." The figure in the pod appeared to be female, based on the anatomical knowledge they had of human physiology. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her hair was a silver-white color that seemed to flow around her head as if suspended in liquid. She appeared to be young by human standards, though it was impossible to tell how long she had been in stasis. most remarkable were the readings coming from the monitoring equipment. According to the displays, every system in her body was functioning perfectly, as if she had just entered the pod yesterday rather than centuries ago. Her brain activity was minimal but constant, suggesting that whatever process was keeping her alive was also maintaining her consciousness at some basic level. "Captain," Voss said, her voice shaking slightly, "these readings, they're impossible. No known stasis technology can maintain this level of biological function for more than a few decades, let alone centuries. Whatever the humans did here, it's far beyond anything we understand." Zektar found himself drawn to the pod, unable to look away from the peaceful expression on the woman's face. There was something about her that seemed familiar, though he was certain he had never encountered a human before. Most of his knowledge of their species came from old records and archaeological artifacts. "Run a full scan," he ordered. "I want to know everything about this pod, this chamber, and whoever's inside." As Voss began her detailed analysis, the monitoring equipment around the chamber seemed to respond to their presence. Additional displays came online, showing what appeared to be historical records and data files. The ship's computer was clearly sophisticated enough to recognize that they were investigating the pod and was providing them with relevant information. What they discovered over the next several hours changed everything they thought they knew about humanity and its place in galactic history. The woman in the pod was identified in the ship's records as Commander Elena Vasquez, though her military rank seemed to be just one of many titles associated with her name. According to the data files, she had been a key figure in something called the Final Protocol, a last-ditch effort by humanity to preserve something essential when their civilization faced extinction. But it wasn't just her identity that was shocking. The dates in the records indicated that this ship had been drifting for nearly 3,000 years, not the few hundred that galactic historians had assumed. Humanity hadn't been a young race that burned out quickly. They had been ancient, with a history that stretched back long before most current galactic civilizations had even evolved. Even more disturbing were the references to other species scattered throughout the historical records. The Krillians, the Gorvok, the Tentari, and dozens of other races that made up the current galactic community were all mentioned in human documents. Not as newly discovered species, but as civilizations that humanity had apparently helped guide and nurture over millennia. "This can't be right," Thane growled, studying the translated records. "These files suggest that humans were involved in our development cycles ago. But we have no records of contact with them until recently." Voss's tentacles writhed with agitation as she processed the data. "Captain, if these records are accurate, then everything we know about galactic history is wrong. According to this, humanity didn't just discover faster-than-light travel a few centuries ago. They've had it for thousands of years." The implications were staggering. If the records were true, then humanity had been the hidden architects of galactic civilization, working behind the scenes to guide younger races toward technological and social development. They had been the gardeners tending a galaxy-wide garden, nurturing species and cultures without ever revealing their true nature or origins. But something had gone wrong. The final entries in the ship's log spoke of a great threat, something that had forced humanity to retreat from their role as galactic shepherds. The Final Protocol had been their last attempt to preserve what they could of their knowledge and influence, preparing for a time when they might be needed again. Commander Vasquez had volunteered to be the keeper of that knowledge, entering into an advanced stasis that would preserve not just her body, but her memories and experiences. She was to be awakened only when the galaxy faced a threat that required humanity's intervention once again. As the salvage crew continued to study the records, they began to understand that they hadn't just discovered an ancient artifact. They had found a sleeping guardian, a remnant of a civilization that had shaped the very foundations of the galaxy they all called home. The monitoring equipment continued to hum softly, maintaining the delicate balance that kept Elena Vasquez suspended between life and death. Her closed eyes showed no sign of movement, but the brain activity monitors suggested that somewhere in the depths of her consciousness, she was aware of their presence. Zektar found himself wondering what dreams might occupy the mind of someone who had slept for 3 millennia. What memories did she carry of a galaxy that no longer existed? What knowledge did she possess that might reshape everything they thought they knew about their own histories? The ship's computer had provided them with enough information to realize that they were dealing with something far beyond their understanding. But it had also made one thing clear: Elena Vasquez was not just a historical curiosity. She was a weapon, a tool, and a repository of knowledge that had been specifically designed to awaken when the galaxy needed humanity's guidance once again. The question that haunted Zektar as he stood before the stasis pod was whether that time had finally come. The current galactic situation was far from stable, with various species locked in territorial disputes and resource conflicts. Trade wars were escalating into actual violence, and there were rumors of a new threat emerging from the dark spaces between spiral arms. Perhaps it was no coincidence that they had discovered this ship now, in this place. Perhaps the universe itself had guided them here, recognizing that the time had come for humanity's hidden guardian to wake up and resume her ancient duties. But awakening something that had slept for 3,000 years was not a decision to be made lightly. The technology keeping Elena alive was beyond their understanding, and any attempt to interfere with it could easily prove fatal. They would need to study the systems more carefully, perhaps bring in experts from multiple species to ensure that the awakening process could be carried out safely. As the boarding team prepared to return to their ship with copies of the essential data, Zektar took one last look at the sleeping woman. There was something peaceful about her expression, but also something that suggested great strength lying dormant beneath the surface. "Soon," he whispered, though he wasn't sure why. "Soon you'll wake up to a galaxy that desperately needs what you have to offer." The monitoring equipment pulsed once, as if responding to his words, and, for just a moment he could have sworn he saw Elena Vasquez's eyelids flutter. But, when he looked more closely, her expression remained unchanged, lost in dreams that stretched across the centuries. The salvage crew sealed the chamber and made their way back through the corridors of the ancient ship. Behind them, the emergency lighting continued to cast its red glow, and the soft hum of machinery maintained its eternal vigil over humanity's sleeping guardian. In the depths of space, the derelict vessel continued its lonely drift through the asteroid field, carrying its precious cargo toward an uncertain future. But, for the first time in 3,000 years, it was no longer completely alone. Someone knew of its existence, someone who might have the wisdom to understand what they had discovered. The galaxy was about to learn that some relics were never meant to stay buried forever. 3 weeks after the discovery, the asteroid field around the ancient human vessel had become the most heavily trafficked area of space in the sector. Word of the find had spread despite Zektar's attempts to keep it secret, and now representatives from every major galactic civilization had arrived to witness what many were calling the archaeological discovery of the millennium. Dr. Kalantheros, the galaxy's leading xenoarchaeologist, stood in the observation deck of the research vessel Deep Scholar and watched the controlled chaos unfolding around the human ship. The 10th Hari scientist had dedicated his life to understanding the scattered remnants of extinct civilizations, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for this. The energy readings are still fluctuating, his assistant, a young Krillian named Jix, reported from the sensor station. "Whatever's keeping her alive is responding to our presence. The more ships that arrive, the more active the systems become." Dr. Theros adjusted his breathing apparatus and considered the implications. In the 3 weeks since Captain Zektar had brought news of the discovery to the Galactic Archaeological Council, they had uncovered evidence that challenged everything they thought they knew about their shared history. The human ship, which had been designated Ancient Protocol by the research team, was not just a vessel. It was a carefully constructed time capsule, designed to preserve not just its sleeping occupant but vast archives of information about galactic history spanning thousands of years. The ship's computer systems had proven remarkably cooperative, providing translated documents and historical records to anyone who requested them. What those records revealed had sent shockwaves through every government and academic institution in known space. Humanity hadn't been the primitive, short-lived species they had assumed. They had been the galaxy's secret guardians for millennia, working behind the scenes to guide the development of younger civilizations. The records showed evidence of human involvement in the development of faster-than-light technology, the establishment of trade routes, and even the resolution of conflicts between species. Most shocking of all were the genetic records. Analysis of the preserved biological samples in the ship's archives showed that many of the galaxy's current species bore traces of deliberate genetic modification, subtle improvements that had been introduced over generations. Humanity had apparently been shepherding not just cultural and technological development, but biological evolution itself. "Dr. Theros," came a voice from the communication system, "the Gorvok delegation is requesting another meeting with you. They're still insisting that their species records show no evidence of human contact." The xenoarchaeologist sighed. The political implications of the discovery were proving almost as complex as the scientific ones. Several species were flatly refusing to accept the evidence, claiming that the human records were fabricated or misinterpreted. Others were demanding access to their specific files, hoping to learn secrets about their own origins. The situation had become so volatile that the Galactic Council had been forced to deploy peacekeeping ships to prevent conflicts from erupting in the research zone. Everyone wanted to control access to the sleeping human and the knowledge she presumably carried. "Tell the Gorvok delegation that I'll meet with them in 2 hours," Dr. Theros replied. "And remind them that we're still in the preliminary analysis phase. Any conclusions we draw now would be premature." But, even as he said it, the xenoarchaeologist knew that the preliminary evidence was overwhelmingly convincing. The human records were too detailed, too consistent, and too accurate to be fabrications. They included information about stellar cartography, planetary geology, and species biology that couldn't have been known without direct observation and interaction. The most compelling evidence came from the ship's medical bay, where they had discovered genetic samples from dozens of species, including many that were supposedly unknown to humanity until recent contact. The samples were ancient, preserved with technology that was still beyond current galactic capabilities, and they showed clear signs of the genetic modifications mentioned in the historical records. "Sir," Jix called out, his voice tense with excitement, "you need to see this. The ship's computer just released another batch of files, and they're about us. About the current galactic political situation." Dr. Theros rushed to the data station where his assistant was studying the newly translated documents. What he saw there made his breathing apparatus work harder to keep up with his increased oxygen needs. The files contained detailed analyses of current galactic tensions, trade disputes, and territorial conflicts. They accurately described political situations that had developed only in the past few years, long after the ship had supposedly been drifting dead in space. The analysis was sophisticated, showing deep understanding of the cultural and economic factors driving current conflicts. "How is this possible?" Jix whispered. "These files suggest that someone has been monitoring galactic affairs continuously, updating the ship's database with current information." Dr. Theros studied the documents more carefully, looking for clues about their origin. What he found made his concern deepen into genuine alarm. The files weren't just observations of current events. They were predictions, detailed forecasts of how current tensions were likely to develop if left unchecked. According to the analysis, the galaxy was approaching a critical point. The various conflicts and tensions weren't random events, but part of a larger pattern that had been building for decades. Someone or something had been deliberately encouraging these conflicts, pushing different species toward confrontation for purposes that weren't immediately clear. The files identified specific individuals and organizations that appeared to be working to destabilize galactic peace, many of whom were respected leaders and institutions. The evidence was detailed and convincing, suggesting a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of multiple governments. Most disturbing of all was the conclusion drawn by the analysis. The destabilization wasn't random or driven by normal political ambitions. It was purposeful, designed to weaken galactic civilization in preparation for something else. The files referenced a returning threat that humanity had apparently faced before, something that required a unified galactic response to defeat. Dr. Theros, came another voice from the communication system, were receiving priority transmissions from multiple government representatives. They're demanding immediate access to any files related to their species or territories. The xenoarchaeologist realized that word of the new files had somehow leaked, probably through one of the many intelligence operatives who had infiltrated the research operation. The political pressure had been intense before, but now it would become unbearable. "Sir," Jix said quietly, "what if the files are right? What if someone really is manipulating galactic politics? And what if the sleeping human is our only hope of stopping it?" Dr. Theros had been asking himself the same questions. The evidence was compelling, but the implications were terrifying. If humanity had really been the galaxy's secret guardians for millennia, then their withdrawal had left a dangerous vacuum. Something else had moved in to fill that void, something that didn't have the galaxy's best interests at heart. He made his way back to the observation deck and looked out at the ancient human vessel floating in the asteroid field. The ship's hull gleamed with reflected starlight, and he could see the soft glow of its internal systems through the viewports. Somewhere deep within that vessel, Elena Vasquez continued her 3,000-year sleep, carrying knowledge that might be crucial to galactic survival. The monitoring equipment aboard the research vessels continued to track the energy readings from the stasis pod. The patterns had become more complex over the past few days, suggesting increased brain activity. Some of the medical experts were convinced that the sleeping woman was beginning to wake up naturally, responding to the presence of so many other minds nearby. Dr. Theros had requested copies of the stasis pod specifications from the ship's computer, hoping to understand the awakening process better. What he had learned was both fascinating and frightening. The technology wasn't just preserving Elena's body. It was maintaining her consciousness in a state of expanded awareness, allowing her to monitor galactic conditions even while asleep. According to the technical documentation, she had been aware of everything that had happened around her for the past 3,000 years. She had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, the development of current galactic politics, and the gradual emergence of the threat that the ship's files warned about. The stasis system was designed to wake her automatically when specific conditions were met, when the galaxy faced a threat that required humanity's intervention, when their hidden archives were discovered by the wrong people, or when a sufficient number of individuals became aware of humanity's true role in galactic history. All three conditions had apparently been met. Dr. Theros, Jix called out urgently, "The energy readings from the ship are spiking. The monitoring equipment is detecting increased neural activity from the stasis pod." The xenoarchaeologist grabbed the nearest communication device. "All research vessels, this is Dr. Theros. Begin monitoring protocols immediately. I believe our guest is beginning to wake up." Across the small fleet of research ships, scientists and government representatives scrambled to their stations. The moment they had all been waiting for was finally at hand. After 3,000 years of sleep, humanity's guardian was returning to consciousness. The implications were staggering. Elena Vasquez would wake up to a galaxy that had been shaped by her species' hidden influence, but which had spent millennia forgetting that humanity had ever existed. She would carry knowledge of threats and opportunities that current civilizations couldn't even imagine. More immediately, she would wake up surrounded by representatives from dozens of species, all of whom wanted something from her. Some sought knowledge about their own origins. Others wanted access to advanced human technology. Still others saw her as a potential tool for advancing their own political agendas. Dr. Theros wondered what it would be like to wake up after such a long sleep and find the galaxy transformed beyond recognition. How would she react to learning that the civilizations humanity had helped nurture had grown and evolved in unexpected ways? Would she see them as children who had finally grown up, or as strangers who had forgotten their origins? The energy readings from the ancient protocol continued to climb, and the ship's own systems began responding with increased activity. Lights came on throughout the vessel, and previously inactive sections began showing signs of life. It was as if the entire ship was preparing for its passengers' return to consciousness. "All stations report ready," came the voice of the lead medical officer from the hospital ship Mercy of Stars. "We have specialists from 12 different species standing by to assist with the awakening process." Dr. Theros nodded, though he wondered if their assistance would be needed or even welcome. The human technology had managed to keep Elena alive and aware for 3 millennia without outside help. It seemed unlikely that they would need alien medical expertise to complete the awakening process. What worried him more was what would happen after she woke up. The woman in the stasis pod was not just a historical curiosity or a repository of ancient knowledge. She was a guardian, a protector, someone who had volunteered to sacrifice her normal life to serve as humanity's representative when the galaxy needed their help. According to the ship's records, she had extensive military experience, advanced knowledge of xenobiology and xenopsychology, and access to technologies that current galactic civilization couldn't match. She was, in essence, a one-woman army designed to defend galactic civilization against threats that ordinary forces couldn't handle. The question that haunted Dr. Theros was whether the current galactic community was ready to accept that kind of help, especially from a species they had assumed was extinct. The political tensions surrounding the discovery were already threatening to erupt into open conflict. How much worse would things become when Elena Vasquez opened her eyes and began asserting humanity's ancient authority? "Energy readings are approaching critical levels," reported the chief science officer aboard the research vessel Deep Scholar. "All indicators suggest that the awakening process has begun and cannot be stopped." Dr. Theros took a deep breath and prepared himself for whatever was coming. In a matter of hours, or perhaps minutes, the galaxy would meet its first living human in centuries. What happened next would determine the future of galactic civilization, and possibly the survival of every species currently calling the galaxy home. The ancient vessel Ancient Protocol pulsed with renewed energy, its sleeping guardian stirring toward consciousness after millennia of patient waiting. Soon, Elena Vasquez would open her eyes to a galaxy that desperately needed her, whether it realized it or not. The moment came without warning or ceremony. Dr. Theros was reviewing the latest translation files when every monitoring device in the research fleet began screaming urgent alerts simultaneously. The energy signature from the ancient protocol had suddenly stabilized, dropping from the chaotic spikes of the previous hours to a steady, powerful rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. "She's awake," whispered the medical officer monitoring the life signs. "Neural activity has shifted to full consciousness. Cardiovascular and respiratory systems are coming online. She's actually awake." Through the observation windows of the research vessels, they could see new lights coming on throughout the ancient human ship. Systems that had remained dormant for millennia were suddenly active, and the vessels seemed to be running full diagnostics on every component. Dr. Theros activated the communication system linking all the research ships. "All vessels, maintain current positions. No one approaches the human ship without my authorization. We have no idea how she'll react to finding herself surrounded by alien vessels." But, even as he gave the order, he wondered if it would matter. If the historical records were accurate, Elena Vasquez had more than enough firepower at her disposal to destroy the entire research fleet if she perceived them as a threat. The ancient protocol was supposedly a military vessel, though its weapons systems had remained completely inactive throughout their study. "Dr. Theros," came an urgent transmission from Captain Zektar aboard the Void Dancer. "I'm receiving a communication request from the human ship. She wants to talk." The xenoarchaeologist felt his breathing apparatus working overtime as adrenaline flooded his system. "Routed through the main research channel. All ships monitor, but let me handle the initial contact." The communication system crackled to life, and then a voice filled the bridge of every ship in the fleet. It was unmistakably human, with the soft tones and complex inflections that xenolinguists had spent years trying to understand from archived recordings. But there was something more to it, a quality of authority and ancient wisdom that made every listener instinctively straighten their posture. "This is Commander Elena Vasquez of the Terran Guardian Corps, aboard the vessel Eternal Vigil," the voice said. "I am aware that approximately 347 non-human individuals across 12 different species are currently monitoring this communication. Before we proceed, I need to establish the current date and galactic political status." Dr. Theros exchanged glances with his assistant before activating the response channel. "Commander Vasquez, this is Dr. Kellen Theros of the Galactic Archaeological Council. The current date is, well, by your calendar, it would be approximately 3,024 years since your ship was last active. We've been studying your vessel for the past month." There was a pause that seemed to stretch forever before Elena responded. "I see. And the status of the void-touched incursion that prompted the final protocol?" The question sent confused murmurs through the research fleet. None of the assembled scientists had encountered any reference to void-touched in the human archives, though the name itself was deeply unsettling. "Commander, we have no records of any group called the void-touched. Our historical archives suggest that humanity vanished from known space approximately 3 centuries ago, though your ship's records indicate that timeline is incorrect." Another pause, this one even longer. Theros gestured to his team to begin compiling the requested data. "Commander, we can provide that information, but perhaps you could help us understand what we're dealing with. Our records make no mention of this threat. The void-touched are difficult to explain in conventional terms. They exist in the spaces between realities, feeding on chaos and conflict. They cannot create directly, only corrupt and destroy what others have built. When my people first encountered them, they had already devastated 17 civilizations in nearby galaxies." The explanation sent chills through every scientist and government representative monitoring the communication. The idea of a threat capable of destroying entire galaxies was beyond their comprehension. "They work slowly," Elena continued, "infiltrating civilizations over centuries or millennia. They corrupt leaders, encourage conflicts, and gradually weaken their targets until they're ready for harvest. The signs are always the same: increasing political tensions, seemingly random conflicts that escalate beyond reason, and the rise of influential figures who benefit from chaos." Dr. Theros felt a growing sense of dread as he thought about the current galactic situation. The increasing trade wars, territorial disputes, and political tensions that had been building for decades suddenly took on a more sinister meaning. "Commander, based on your description, I'm afraid that many of those signs are present in our current galactic situation. We've been experiencing increasing tensions between various species, conflicts that seem to escalate beyond their original causes." "Then, they're here," Elena said simply. And they've been working for a long time. Dr. Theros, I need you to transmit all current political and military data immediately. I also need to know the current location of any human colonies or outposts that might still exist. Commander, as far as we know, humanity is extinct except for you. We found no evidence of surviving human populations anywhere in known space. The silence that followed this statement was profound and, somehow, terrible. When Elena finally spoke again, her voice carried a weight of grief that made every listener feel the loss as if it were their own. I see. Then, the final protocol succeeded in preserving something, at least. Dr. Theros, are you familiar with the concept of Guardian protocols in military doctrine? I'm afraid not, Commander. Our knowledge of human military practices is quite limited. A Guardian protocol is a last resort, activated only when a civilization faces existential threat. It involves placing key individuals in extended stasis to preserve essential knowledge and capabilities. I volunteered for this duty knowing that I might wake up to find everything and everyone I had ever known gone forever. Dr. Theros found himself struggling to respond. The magnitude of Elena's sacrifice was almost incomprehensible. She had given up her life, her family, her entire world to serve as a guardian for species she had never met, people who wouldn't even know she existed. Commander, we can't imagine what you've sacrificed. But, we're grateful that you're here. If the threat you've described is real, then, we desperately need your help. The threat is real, Dr. Theros. And, if my sensors are reading correctly, it's much closer than any of you realize. The energy patterns I'm detecting around your research fleet suggest that at least some of the vessels present have been compromised. The statement caused immediate chaos on the communication channels as representatives from various species began demanding to know what Elena meant. Dr. Theros quickly muted all channels except the direct line to the human ship. Commander, can you be more specific about what you're detecting? 3 of the ships in your fleet are carrying individuals who are not entirely what they appear to be. The Void-Touched are masters of possession and influence. They rarely reveal themselves directly, preferring to work through corrupted agents. Dr. Theros felt his blood turn cold. Are you saying that some of our people have been taken over by these entities? Influenced, corrupted, or replaced? The end result is the same. They will try to prevent me from acting against the greater Void-Touched presence, and they will attempt to eliminate me if direct opposition fails. As if summoned by her words, the communication system suddenly came alive with urgent transmissions from multiple ships. Several government representatives were demanding immediate access to Elena, insisting that she posed a potential threat that needed to be contained. Others were calling for her to be transferred to more secure facilities for study and debriefing. Dr. Theros, Elena's voice cut through the chaos, I'm about to activate my ship's defensive systems. I recommend that all legitimate vessels withdraw to a safe distance immediately. The compromised vessels will reveal themselves shortly. Commander, wait. We can't just assume that some of our people are enemies. There has to be another way to. Elena's response was interrupted by the sudden appearance of weapon signatures from 3 ships in the research fleet. The vessels had powered up their combat systems and were targeting the ancient protocol with enough firepower to reduce it to cosmic dust. All ships, withdraw immediately. Dr. Theros broadcast on the general communication channel. Unknown hostiles have activated weapons systems. But, even as the legitimate research vessels began emergency maneuvers to escape the combat zone, Dr. Theros realized that Elena had been right. The 3 ships that had revealed weapons weren't trying to capture or contain the human vessel. They were trying to destroy it completely, along with any evidence of humanity's true role in galactic history. The ancient protocol responded with technologies that defied everything the assembled scientists thought they knew about physics. Instead of raising energy shields, the ship seemed to simply step sideways out of normal space, avoiding the incoming weapons fire by existing in a slightly different dimension. When it reappeared, its own weapons systems were online and targeting the hostile vessels with surgical precision. The battle was over in less than 30 seconds. The 3 compromised vessels found their weapons systems disabled, their engines shut down, and their crews unconscious. Elena had neutralized the immediate threat without destroying the ships or killing anyone aboard them. Dr. Theros, Elena's voice returned to the communication channel, calm and professional despite the brief combat. I've sedated the crews of the compromised vessels. My medical systems are detecting significant neurological abnormalities that are consistent with Void-Touched influence. They'll need extensive treatment to remove the corruption. The xenoarchaeologist stared out at the ancient human vessel, trying to process what he had just witnessed. Elena had casually demonstrated technologies that surpassed anything in the current galactic arsenal, and she had done it with the restraint of someone who valued life even when defending herself. "Commander, how did you know? How could you tell that those ships were compromised?" The void touched leave traces, Dr. Theros. Subtle changes in behavior patterns alter 6 months after Elena Vasquez opened her eyes to a galaxy she no longer recognized. The political landscape of known space had transformed beyond recognition. The revelation of void-touched infiltration had triggered the largest security operation in galactic history, with every major civilization conducting intensive investigations of their own governments and institutions. Elena stood on the bridge of the Eternal Vigil, watching through the viewports as representatives from 43 different species gathered in what had once been a barren star system. The Nexus Assembly, as they were calling it, was the first truly independent governmental body in galactic history, composed entirely of individuals who had been verified as free from void-touched influence. "Commander," came the voice of Dr. Theros through the communication system, "the final security scans are complete. We now have confirmed clean representatives from every major species and most minor ones. The Assembly is ready to begin formal proceedings." Elena nodded, though she knew the real work was just beginning. Identifying and removing compromised individuals had been the easy part, relatively speaking. Now they had to rebuild galactic civilization in a way that could resist future void-touched infiltration while simultaneously preparing for the coming battle. The past months had revealed the true scope of the enemy's influence. Void-touched agents had been discovered in positions of power throughout the galaxy, from military commanders to trade guild leaders to religious figures. They had been orchestrating conflicts, sabotaging peace negotiations, and gradually building toward what Elena's analysis suggested would have been a catastrophic galactic war. But their most insidious work had been in the realm of technology and science. The enemy had been subtly guiding galactic development away from technologies that could detect or resist their influence, while encouraging research into areas that would make the eventual harvest more efficient. "Elena," came another voice over the communication channel, this one belonging to Admiral Corvex of the Tentari Defense Fleet. "Our intelligence teams have completed their analysis of the corrupted research projects. The implications are disturbing." Elena activated her personal communication screen to see the Admiral's weathered face. Corvex had become one of her closest allies in the fight against the Void-Touched, partly because his military background made him uniquely suited to understand the scope of the threat they faced. "What have your teams discovered, Admiral?" The psychic resonance technology that was being developed by the Krillian Science Institute wasn't intended for communication enhancement as they believed. "Our analysis suggests it was designed to amplify the Void-Touched's ability to influence minds across vast distances." Elena felt a familiar chill as another piece of the enemy's plan became clear. They were preparing to take direct control of the galaxy's population during the harvest. What else? "The Gorvok military's new fleet deployment strategies would have concentrated most of our defensive forces in exactly the wrong positions to repel an invasion from extragalactic space. The trade route modifications proposed by the Commerce Guild would have disrupted supply lines for any coordinated resistance effort. Even the cultural exchange programs were designed to spread void-touched influence more efficiently." The scope of the manipulation was breathtaking in its complexity and long-term planning. For 3,000 years, the Void-Touched had been positioning galactic civilization exactly where they wanted it, like pieces on a vast game board that spanned multiple star systems. Elena called up her own analysis files on the main display. "Admiral, based on my ship's deep space sensors, I believe I've located the source of their coordination efforts." The display showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy, with hundreds of red dots marking confirmed void-touched activity over the past millennia. But there was a pattern to the distribution, lines of influence that all seemed to point toward a specific region of space far beyond the current borders of galactic civilization. "The Void-Touched don't operate independently," Elena explained. "They require coordination from command entities that exist in their native dimension. But, to maintain influence in our reality, those entities need anchor points, physical locations where they can project their power." Admiral Corvex studied the display with growing understanding. "You're saying there's a base of operations somewhere out there?" "More than a base. Based on the patterns we're seeing, I believe they've established a full invasion staging area in the void space between galaxies. They've been using it to coordinate their infiltration efforts and prepare for the final phase of their operation." Elena manipulated the display to show projected enemy movements based on current galactic conditions. The simulation was terrifying in its clarity, showing waves of void-touched forces sweeping through inhabited systems, consuming the psychic energy of entire populations before moving on to the next targets.
How long do we have? Admiral Korvax asked.
My analysis suggests they were planning to begin active operations within the next 2 years. The discovery of my ship and the subsequent exposure of their agents has probably accelerated their timeline.
I estimate we have perhaps 18 months before they launch their attack.
The Admiral's expression grew grim as he processed the implications. 18 months to rebuild our governments, purge our militaries of corruption, develop countermeasures against psychic manipulation, and somehow mount an offensive against entities that exist in dimensions we barely understand. Elena smiled, the first genuine expression of humor she had shown since awakening. Admiral, you forgot the most important part. We also have to do all of that while convincing 43 different species to work together more closely than they ever have before. Despite the overwhelming nature of their task, Elena felt oddly optimistic about their chances. The past months had shown her that the current galactic civilizations possessed qualities that the ancient enemy had never encountered before. The diversity of species meant diversity of thought, making it much harder for the Void Touch to predict and counter their strategies. More importantly, the galactic community had shown remarkable resilience in the face of the revelations about infiltration and manipulation. Instead of fragmenting into paranoid isolation, most species had chosen to work together, sharing information and resources in an unprecedented display of cooperation. Elena, came a new voice over the communication system. This is Council Speaker Ithera. The Assembly has reached a consensus on the first phase of our response plan. Elena activated the connection to see the elegant features of the Eltarian diplomat who had been elected to lead the Nexus Assembly. Speaker Ithera had proven herself to be a skilled negotiator and strategic thinker, qualities that were essential for coordinating the efforts of so many different species.
What has the Assembly decided, Speaker? We're implementing your proposal for the Guardian Network.
Each species will contribute resources and personnel for the construction of psychic shield generators around every inhabited system. The technology from your ship will be adapted for mass production using the industrial capabilities of our various worlds. It was an ambitious plan that would require unprecedented cooperation between species that had been in conflict just months ago. But Elena's analysis showed it was their best hope for protecting galactic civilization from direct void-touched assault.
We're also approving the formation of joint military task forces, Speaker Ithera continued. Admiral Korvax will coordinate the overall defense strategy, with fleet elements from every major power operating under unified command. Elena nodded approvingly.
The political implications of that decision were staggering, representing a level of trust between species that had never existed before. But it was exactly the kind of cooperation they would need to have any hope of success.
And the offensive operations, Speaker? The Assembly has authorized you to select volunteers for what we're calling the Deep Strike Initiative.
You'll have access to the most advanced ships and weapons we can provide, along with personnel who have been specially trained to resist psychic manipulation. Elena had been hoping for this authorization, but she also understood the risks involved. The mission to locate and destroy the void-touched staging area would be extremely dangerous, requiring a small force to venture into the void space between galaxies where normal physics might not apply. I'll need volunteers who understand that this is likely a one-way mission, Elena said carefully. The technologies required to reach the enemy's base and fight in their dimension are largely untested. We'll be operating far from any possible rescue or support.
Commander, Admiral Korvax interjected, I think you'll find that you have more volunteers than you know what to do with.
Word of what's at stake has spread throughout our fleets. There are beings from every species who are willing to risk everything to protect their homes and families. Elena felt a surge of respect for these allies she had never expected to have. Her own people had fought the void touched with courage and determination, but they had been fighting alone, relying on their own resources and technologies. This galactic community was choosing to face the enemy together, combining their diverse strengths in ways that might prove more effective than anything humanity had achieved. The communication system chimed with an incoming priority message from the deep space monitoring stations that Elena had helped establish around the galaxy's perimeter. The news they brought confirmed Elena's worst fears and her greatest hopes. Commander, came the voice of the monitoring station's chief scientist, we're detecting massive energy fluctuations in the void space beyond the galactic rim.
The patterns are consistent with large-scale dimensional manipulation. something big is happening out there.
Elena studied the incoming data streams, her enhanced neural interfaces allowing her to process the information far faster than normal minds could handle. What she saw made her blood run cold.
The enemy has detected our countermeasures. They're accelerating their invasion timeline. Elena's voice carried across every communication channel in the Nexus assembly. All defensive preparations are now priority 1.
The Deep Strike initiative launches in 60 days. The response was immediate and overwhelming.
Across dozens of star systems, construction projects shifted into emergency priority mode.
Military forces began intensive training with human-provided technologies.
Scientists and engineers worked around the clock to adapt Elena's psychic shield generators for mass deployment.
But, most importantly, volunteers began arriving from every corner of the galaxy, beings who had heard the call and chosen to risk everything for the chance to strike back at humanity's ancient enemy. They came from species that had never worked together before, united by the understanding that their survival depended on cooperation.
Elena watched the preparations with a mixture of pride and sorrow.
These beings were preparing to fight a war they didn't fully understand against an enemy they had never seen, all because they trusted her knowledge and judgment. The responsibility was crushing, but it was also inspiring. The galaxy that Elena had awakened to find was not the one her people had originally protected. It was something new and different, shaped by thousands of years of independent development and growth. But, in many ways, it was better than what humanity had achieved alone. Her people had been guardians, protectors who watched over younger civilizations from a distance. But, these species had learned to guard each other, to share resources and knowledge, to stand together against threats that no single civilization could face alone. As she prepared for the most dangerous mission of her lone life, Elena realized that the Void Touched had made a crucial miscalculation. They had expected to find the same galaxy that humanity had once protected, divided and vulnerable. Instead, they would face something they had never encountered before, a truly united galactic civilization that had learned to combine its diverse strengths. The war was about to begin, but, for the first time since awakening, Elena believed they might actually win. The Deep Strike fleet assembled at the edge of the galaxy was unlike anything that had ever existed in known space. 57 vessels from 23 different species, each one equipped with technologies that blended human innovations with the best engineering their respective civilizations could provide. The ships themselves seemed to shimmer with barely contained energy, their hulls inscribed with protective symbols from a dozen different cultures. Elena stood on the bridge of the Eternal Vigil, now serving as the fleet's flagship, and watched the final preparations through her enhanced sensors. Every ship carried volunteers who had passed the most rigorous physical and psychological testing in galactic history. They were the best and brightest their species had to offer, individuals who had proven themselves capable of functioning in impossible circumstances. "Commander," came the voice of Captain Thrix, a Gorvok warrior who commanded the heavy assault vessel Iron Determination. "Our engineers have completed the integration of your dimensional shielding technology.
All vessels report ready for void space transition." Elena nodded, though she couldn't shake her concern about what they were about to attempt.
The technology required to travel through the spaces between dimensions was largely theoretical, based on her ship's ancient archives and the combined scientific knowledge of the Nexus assembly. They would be venturing into realms where normal physics might not apply, pursuing an enemy that existed partially outside their reality.
"Dr. Theros," Elena called to the xenoarchaeologist who had insisted on joining the mission despite having no military training, "final sensor readings?"
The scientist looked up from his instrument cluster, his expression grim but determined. "The dimensional disturbances beyond the galactic rim are increasing exponentially. Whatever the Void Touched are preparing, they're putting enormous resources into it.
I'm reading energy signatures that dwarf anything we've ever detected."
Elena studied the data streaming across her displays, her enhanced mind processing information that would overwhelm normal consciousness. The patterns were clear to someone with her training. The enemy was preparing to launch the largest psychic assault in their recorded history. Every inhabited world in the galaxy would be targeted simultaneously, with the goal of harvesting the life energy of billions of beings at once.
"Fleet commanders," Elena announced on the general communication channel, "we are initiating final countdown sequence. Remember, once we transition into void space, we'll be operating under completely different physical laws.
Stay close to the flagship and follow my lead exactly." The response came from 43 different captains representing species that had been at war with each other just months ago. Now they spoke with one voice, united in their determination to protect their homes and families from an ancient evil.
Elena activated the dimensional transition drives that her ship's computers had developed based on archived human technology.
The process required precise coordination between all vessels in the fleet, creating a collective field that would allow them to exist in the void space between realities.
The transition itself was indescribable.
One moment they were surrounded by the familiar darkness of normal space, with distant stars providing reference points for navigation. The next moment they were floating in a realm that defied every understanding of physics and reality.
The void space was not empty as its name suggested.
It was filled with impossible geometries, structures that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the mind could process. Colors that had no names shifted and flowed around them, and, in the distance they could see formations that might have been planets, stars, or something else entirely.
"All ships report successful transition," came Admiral Korvax's voice from the command vessel Unity's edge. "Dimensional shielding is holding steady. We're actually here, Elena. We made it to the void." Elena was studying her sensors, trying to make sense of readings that shouldn't have been possible.
"Admiral, I'm detecting the void-touched staging area.
Bearing 37 Mark 15, distance approximately 4 void units."
The measurement meant nothing in normal space, but her ship's computers had somehow calculated distances using principles that applied in this strange realm. What they were approaching was vast beyond imagination, a structure that seemed to stretch across impossible distances while somehow remaining compact enough to be comprehensible. "Elena," Dr. Theros called urgently, "I'm reading massive psychic emanations from that structure."
"The energy levels are..." "Commander, they're preparing to launch the Harvest Assault. We may have arrived just in time."
Through the viewports of the fleet, they could see their destination taking shape as they approached.
The void-touched staging area wasn't a base in any conventional sense.
It was a living structure, something that seemed to be part building, part organism, and part geometric impossibility. Massive tendrils of dark energy reached out from its core toward the distant glow that represented their home galaxy. "Fleet commanders," Elena announced, "we are looking at the source of every conflict, every war, and every act of manipulation that has plagued galactic civilization for the past 3 millennia. That structure is where they've been coordinating their infiltration efforts and preparing for the final harvest." The response from the fleet was immediate and overwhelming. Weapons systems came online, shields powered up to maximum strength, and 43 different species prepared to fight side by side against humanity's ancient enemy.
But Elena knew that conventional weapons would be useless here.
The void-touched existed partially outside normal reality, and their staging area was protected by forces that could bend space and time itself. The battle they were about to fight would be won or lost on levels that most beings couldn't even perceive. "All vessels, maintain defensive formation and prepare for psychic assault," Elena commanded.
"The enemy knows we're here.
They're going to try to take control of our minds before we can reach their core systems."
The attack came without warning, a wave of mental force that crashed over the fleet like a tsunami of pure malevolence.
Elena felt the enemy probing at her consciousness, trying to find weaknesses they could exploit to turn her against her allies. But her human mind had been specifically designed to resist such intrusions, and the psychic shields her ship provided were holding firm. Around her, she could hear other captains reporting similar attacks. The void-touched were trying to corrupt individual commanders, hoping to turn the fleet against itself. But the preparation and training had paid off. The volunteers had learned to recognize psychic intrusion and had developed mental disciplines that made them surprisingly resistant to manipulation. "Elena," came an urgent transmission from Captain Zeltar aboard the Krillian science vessel Deep Thought, "our analysis teams are detecting something unexpected."
"The structure isn't just a staging area. It's a nursery."
Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the strange environment around them.
"Explain." "We're reading biological signatures consistent with void-touched reproduction processes.
They're not just preparing to harvest our galaxy. They're preparing to use the energy from that harvest to spawn a new generation of their kind."
The implications were horrifying. The harvest wouldn't just destroy galactic civilization.
It would fuel the creation of thousands of new void-touched entities that would then spread to other galaxies, repeating the cycle of infiltration and consumption on a cosmic scale.
"All ships, emergency acceleration," Elena commanded. "We have to reach that structure before they complete their spawning process."
The Deep Strike fleet surged forward through the impossible geometry of void space, their combined shields blazing with energy as they pushed through waves of psychic assault. The void-touched were throwing everything they had at the approaching vessels, but the diverse nature of the fleet was proving to be its greatest strength. Each species brought different mental disciplines and cultural perspectives to the battle, making it impossible for the enemy to develop a single strategy that would work against everyone.
The Gorvok warriors met mental assault with pure stubborn determination.
The 10th Hari used meditation techniques that had been developed over centuries of spiritual practice.
The Krillians applied scientific analysis to break down psychic attacks into component parts.
Elena found herself coordinating not just a military assault but a symphony of consciousness, dozens of different minds working together to resist an enemy that fed on division and conflict. It was exactly the opposite of what the Void Touched expected, and she could sense their growing confusion and alarm. "Elena," Dr. Theros called out, "I'm detecting structural weaknesses in the staging area.
The psychic emanations are destabilizing their dimensional anchors. If we can overload their core systems, the entire structure might collapse back into their native dimension."
Elena studied the readings and realized that the xenoarchaeologist was right. The enemy's massive psychic assault was drawing power from the same systems that kept their staging area stable in void space. If they could force the Void Touch to expend enough energy defending themselves, the structure would become unstable and implode.
"All ships, concentrate fire on the core emanation points," Elena commanded. "We're not trying to destroy them with conventional weapons. We're trying to force them to burn out their own power systems."
The fleet opened fire with every weapon they possessed, sending streams of energy and projectiles toward the massive structure. But the real battle was being fought on the psychic level, where the combined will of 43 different species pushed back against an entity that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia.
Elena could feel the moment when the tide turned.
The Void Touched had expected to face a divided enemy, weakened by internal conflicts and easy to manipulate. Instead, they found themselves confronting a unified force that drew strength from its diversity rather than being weakened by it.
The structure began to convulse, its impossible geometries becoming unstable as the dimensional anchors failed. Massive sections of the staging area folded in on themselves, disappearing into dimensions that normal minds couldn't perceive. "Elena," Admiral Korvax called urgently, "the dimensional distortions are spreading. We need to get out of here before we're caught in the collapse." But Elena was watching her sensors, realizing that they had achieved something far more significant than the destruction of a single enemy base. The collapse of the staging area was sending shockwaves through the void space, disrupting Void-Touched operations across multiple dimensions. "Admiral, we're not just destroying their base. We're cutting off their access to our reality entirely. The collapse is sealing the dimensional pathways they've been using to influence our galaxy." The fleet began emergency retreat procedures, racing back toward the dimensional transition point as reality warped and twisted around them. Behind them, the Void-Touched staging area continued to collapse, taking with it 3,000 years of carefully planned infiltration and manipulation. As they transitioned back into normal space, Elena felt a profound sense of completion. The mission that had begun when she entered stasis 3 millennia ago was finally finished. The Void-Touched threat to galactic civilization had been ended, not by humanity alone but by the combined efforts of species that humanity had once protected from the shadows. "Elena," came Dr. Theros's voice, filled with wonder and relief, "sensor readings confirm it. The psychic emanations from void space have ceased entirely. Whatever influence the Void-Touched still had in our galaxy has been cut off." Elena looked around the bridge of her ship, seeing the faces of allies she had never expected to have. The galaxy she had awakened to was not the one her people had originally protected. It was something better, a community that had learned to guard itself through cooperation and mutual support. "Commander," Admiral Korvax said formally, "on behalf of the Nexus Assembly and all free species in the galaxy, thank you. Your sacrifice and knowledge have saved us all." Elena smiled, feeling a peace she hadn't known since before entering stasis. "Admiral, I think you have it backwards. You saved me. My people fought the Void-Touched alone and could only delay them. But, together, we've ended their threat forever." As the Deep Strike fleet made its way back to inhabited space, Elena reflected on the strange turns that life could take. She had gone to sleep as humanity's guardian, expecting to wake up to defend a galaxy of children who needed protection. Instead, she had awakened to find a galaxy of equals who needed only knowledge and coordination to defend themselves. The ancient relic that the salvage crew had discovered was not just Elena Vasquez. It was the idea that different species could work together, that diversity was strength rather than weakness, and that the galaxy was safer when its inhabitants looked out for each other rather than relying on hidden guardians.
Elena Vasquez had opened her eyes to find that her greatest achievement was not in sleeping for 3,000 years, but in helping to awaken a galaxy to its own strength.